first season on, but I do have a bunch of friends who are on season 2. So, and also I'm Ryan, the effects lead effects. I don't know what you. I can't remember what his actual title is. Supervisor, something like that. I'm his girlfriend, so I got to hear a ton about what was going on season 2. So I was still in the loop, and when season 3 came up, I jumped on my chance to get on it because I wanted to be on season 2, but I had just started. I think that was just around the time that I started on Looney Tunes, so I couldn't jump ship immediately, and also didn't want to because I wanted to be on Looney Tunes. So been animating on so far, and we're about halfway through the season so far. So yeah, but this is not from season 3 because all that's still under NDA. But this is a scene from season 2. Which scene was it specifically? This is episode 7. So this is a really short one. I've got 2 different scenes from season 2. I've got this one and then one from episode 12, I think it was, if I remember correctly. And yeah, I'm just going to show you kind of what we're given and how we go through the process to animation. And feel free to ask any questions you guys have, because I've got the chat open on my iPad to my left, so I'm keeping an eye on it. So yeah. So basically, this is what we're given. When we start animation on an episode is we open up the scene and it looks like this, and we have a whole bunch of nonsense that we don't really need, but it's just kind of guidelines for us to follow. Oh, okay. Just request to meet. So, unfortunately, I don't have 2 screens because I'm working on a Microsoft Surface Studio is my computer, which is why I've got the weird square format. And it doesn't let me use a second monitor with Toon Boom because if I use a tablet with it, it throws the position of where I'm clicking way off and makes it unusable. So I have to unfortunately have my node view cutting into my window. So but yeah, do you guys want me to go kind of more in depth into how Toon Boom works? Because I know that Ryan was kind of talking about that when he did his showcase, but it's pretty different how animation versus effects uses Toon Boom. So yeah, so here, I can just open this wide up so that it's easier to see. So it's kind of hard to explain right off the bat, but I like to kind of compare it to a paper puppet, where these guys here, the blue ones, the drawings, are like the paper pieces, and then anything that's a green thing on top of it is like the pins. And whenever you're interacting with something, you're either interacting with the drawing or the piece of paper, or you're moving it using a pin, basically. And you can change both of them, and both of them do different things. But when you put them together and make them really complicated in different arrangements, you end up with a rig. This is what Gary looks like on the inside. So all of these parts correspond to some part of Gary. And it seems really complicated at first, but I promise you that once you've worked with it for a little bit, it does start to make a lot more sense, and it gets a lot less complicated. But I know it can be daunting at first, because when I started using Toon Boom, it was my second year of college, and I took a look at it, and my brain just went, nope, and it became completely smooth and completely refused to absorb any information that was being given to me. So, it is, at least in my experience, a program that like you can learn a lot from talking to other people or listening to explanations, but going in and playing with it yourself goes a really long way. But yeah, so here, one sec. Let me see what the most simple part of him is. Because and a lot of this is it's information that you can kind of ignore. Like once you start getting into it, it becomes less complicated because you realize there's a lot of it that you don't really need to pay attention to, because pretty much all you really worry about with something like this is these parts. You ignore everything below it, and it's just this stuff that really matters to you when you're animating. You've got, for example, his ear. This part corresponds to the inside of his ear. Oops, moving things around. One sec. Let me just lock some stuff so I'm not selecting the wrong things. There we go. So you've got like the inside of his ear that you can move around. You've got his full ear that you can move around. And then you've got his shadow that you can move around. And all of these are held within the same drawing, which that also does make it a little more complicated, but I find that it really helps to think of these guys as layers, the way you would have in Photoshop, and you put it all together as a group. So, like, if you go within the group, you've got different layers, but they're all still contained within the same group, and that's kind of what drawings function as. You get up to 4 in one piece. Let me just check and make sure that this is visible. Can pretty much everyone see this, or are we still having problems? Yeah? Okay, good. Okay, so, yeah, so, like, the reason that you'll use one drawing and split it up into different parts using these things down here, like, that's when you start to get into what these things do. These ones are basically just telling it, for this, I only want you to show me that top layer that's in it, so that when I use this with this pin that's moving it around, I'm only moving this piece around rather than the entire thing that it's attached to. And a lot of why you do it like this is, for one, to make it a little easier to change things around. So for example, if I want to change what this ear looks like or draw, say, a new angle of it, I don't have to click each individual piece and change them individually. I can just click on one of them, go in, and change them all at once. I can do this as one full drawing and then split it up into parts so that I can animate them separately, but having to recreate it is less difficult and less time consuming than if they were each in their own group, basically, or their own drawing. So, and it's also to make it so that the computer has to do less work, because it's basically working with one object that's split into a bunch of littler parts versus like different objects for each part. Sorry, I'm just catching up on the chat. But yeah, so this will will be recorded. So anyways, okay, so pretty much everything or all of Gary is split up in the same manner as his ear. So we'll have, for example, his arm, and if you go into it, it's split up into a bunch of different individual parts that make it so that you can change it in different ways. And every rig is going to be different. Each one's going to have their own unique quirks and things like that, that once you're used to Toon Boom, you can kind of figure them out as you go along, or there will be instructions given to you that tell you, like, here's this thing that's a bit funny about this rig, and here's how you use it. And another thing that Toon Boom does is something called deformers, which is these guys. Wait, there we go. Sorry. Normally I have a keypad that I use for my shortcuts, and mine's at work right now, so I'm going with my keyboard, and I'm not totally used to what buttons correspond to what, so I'm having to relearn some things myself. So anyways, so on top of all that, to make animators' lives a little bit easier, is something called deformers. So I'll just turn this guy on. So basically what that does is makes it so that you can kind of noodle things around without actually having to redraw the elements themselves. So it lets us do stuff like that. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that, like, there's different kinds of deformers. We have these ones that are called like point deformers or curve deformers is what they call them a lot of the time. So this will be like a 2-point curve deformer. We also have, I'm trying to think of, oh, on his face, something called envelope deformers, which basically just let us change the outline of it, like morph it around pretty much. So different ones get used for different cases, and we can also swap them around using drawings, which changes it to like a bone deformer, which is what gives him an elbow. So I know this is complicated and getting more in depth to it than I really need to, but yeah. So those are the main basics of animation in Toon Boom. So yeah, this is just one where he has an actual like defined elbow that we'll use for a lot of things where he's bending his arm more than like a noodle arm would allow for, because if he's bending his arm past a certain degree, they do want to see him have it like a defined elbow, like a real person would have. So, yeah. Anyways, so we get the scene, and it looks like this. And let me just get him back to where he was. So yeah, so they give us this, and basically this is just telling you when he's here. Actually, I'm talking over myself. Let me do that. So in the scene, we are given the storyboards. You get to watch them through. This is a really short one. Okay, so yeah, so we're given the storyboards, and this is what we're following for what they want for animation. And we are given all of the elements that we need in the scene. So these are to reference when Gary gets over to this point in the scene, he's supposed to be this big. And this red square thing is to tell us that this is where how big the background is supposed to be compared to the camera. So what I would do is go in and select my background, make sure that it's unlocked so I can actually affect it, and I just resize it so that it's the right size for the scene. And then once I'm done that, unless there's a camera move, I don't have to worry about that for the rest of the scene, so I can kind of just turn that off. That's my size one, and there we go. So that's gone now. So, oh, and when we're given the puppets, they'll have built-in like different versions. So this is Gary when he's facing left, Gary if he's facing right, because he's asymmetrical. He's a character where we have to watch where his bangs are on one side of his face, and if we flop him to make him look the other direction, we have to make sure that his hair is also getting flipped, and he's not just mirrored across the x-axis. So, yeah, and his hand, his robot arm. Yeah, a lot of the characters are asymmetrical, so there are little things like Gary's hand, his hair. I'm trying to think because a lot of characters have new outfits for this season, so like things on their outfits, like there's one character who has a stripe on one side of the outfit that's thin, and the other side is a thicker stripe. So we have to watch to make sure that those ones are on the right side. So to make our lives easier, they just have the different views in the model when we're given it. And what I like to do so that I have access to those all the time, because it's already the right length for the scene, so I don't want to accidentally forget how many frames long it's supposed to be when I export it, is I mark it off for myself, and then I can just shove everything down to the end, oops, that I don't need. And get it out of my way, so I don't have to worry about it. But if I need it later, then it's there for me to use. So there we go. So that's all cleared out. Don't have to worry about it. Sorry, one sec. This is another case where I can't remember what the key command is to get this back over here. No, it's not that one. One sec. You guys get to see preferences for a minute there. Is it Control-Shift-K? Oh, okay. There we go. So there. So I got Gary in the scene, and so this is the sizing, so I'm just going to match him to that before I get started on posing. So what we start with is a posing pass, where we go through the storyboards, the Leica, and we see what poses the character needs to hit. So we're not just going straight through and animating as we go along, because it's harder to keep a character on model if you do that, and it's hard to make the animation snappy. And there are certain kinds of animation where animating as you go along is actually the best way to do it. Although more so in traditional animation where you're hand drawing each frame than in puppet animation like this. But things like dancing, I know figure skating is one, like Yuri on Ice, that sort of stuff. A lot of the time, animating straight ahead animation is what we call it, where you're not going pose to pose. You're not figuring out like the positions in advance. You're just like seeing how the character moves with each new frame. Those are the typical applications of straight ahead animation. Things where you don't want them to look too robot. Like you need them to look more natural, I guess, is how I would describe it. But it's not the kind of thing that you typically run into with TV animation and puppet animation especially. But there are exceptions. So for the most part, you go through and you do a posing pass, and especially on Final Space, what we do is half of the amount of time that we have for an episode is it's for the posing pass. So we go through, put the characters in all of the main poses of the scene and some breakdowns if it's something that especially needs it. So we'll show a frame of transition between the first pose and the next pose. And I do have an example that I can show you. But we'll submit that, get that approved, so that they make sure that the character is staying on model, so they get to look at, do these poses look all right? And before you even start worrying about putting the character in motion, you figure out, like, does this look okay? Yes? Okay, then you can animate it. So, yeah, half will be for posing, and then the second half is for animation. So, in this scene, he would be moving up to the second size at about this part. So at this point, I would move him over here and make sure that he's matching his size, and he is, and that means that this one's too big. So I'm just going to shrink him down so that it looks like he's walking forward in space. There we go. Yeah. And with that done, I don't need his size anymore, or his size reference, so that I can turn that off and I don't have to look at it anymore because it makes my screen cluttered and I don't like it. So there we go. So I've got that and him moving up in space, and then I hit the animate button and it does the rest for me and my job is done, right? I wish. That'd be great. But no. So now I get to go in and do the actual job of putting him into his poses. And I do actually have this one finished and posed out. And I'll show you that once I'm done one pose to kind of show you how I do it. And then I have another one that I can go into. My device battery is low. Great. One sec. Just gotta plug in the tablet. There we go. We're good. Okay, so for this, oh god. Hold on, one sec. That was really weird. I have a tablet that has touch, like a touch feature, and sometimes I don't realize it's on, and it makes my zoom scroll wildly. So, in this case, I'm going to need his elbows, so I'm going to give him his bony arms. And this thing doesn't follow it for some reason. It's not too big a deal. So I'm just gonna go in and kind of match, like, I'm gonna match to the boards within, like, I'm gonna follow the general vibe of the boards, but not necessarily match it exactly to that pose. I'm just going to, I look at it and I go, how would Gary hit that pose? And I try to do that rather than actually one for one matching it, because the storyboard artists have a giant job that they've got to do. So a lot of the time they can't, like, worry about having the character, like, in a position that actually would reflect what the character would do in animation. And that's what the animator's job is to actually look at that and be like, okay, I get the idea of what is wanted for this pose. I'm gonna do that. That's what I do. So for this one, he's kind of supposed to be leaning forward through the doorway and feeling really awkward. I don't remember what the context of this scene was, but it's in episode 7, so if anyone wants to hunt it down, you're free to. But he was going to look for Quinn. No, not Quinn. What's he looking for in this one? Oh yeah, Nightfall, sorry. Um, oh right, no, sorry. This is the, like, holodeck episode. So he walks in and he finds her creating her own Gary and reacts with more than a little shock. So I've got to get that arm up there. So if I were doing this, for real, for the actual episode, I would be putting a lot more care into it than I'm going to be doing right now, because you guys don't want to see me sit here and methodically pose this character out, like, perfectly, because it'll take a lot longer. But I'll do a rough job, and then I've got another scene, or another version of this scene where it's actually done, so you guys can see what the end product would look like. And this is actually a scene that I was given for. Oh yeah, and then so, like, different angles of his arm are contained within his arm. So there will be certain things where they try to give us as many different versions of something that is going to commonly be used, like arms having different angles that they're viewed at, because characters are not going to be moving in flat space. They want us to treat it as 3D as possible. So things like different angles for the arms, and we have an entire hand library, as you can see here, that where they just try to hit as many poses as they think we can use as possible, and then beyond that, it's really up to us to create any new ones that are specific use case appropriate. So there may be a hand. I think in this case I did redraw this hand in the other version that I've got, because none of these really matched what I wanted for it. And yeah. You could you Yeah, it's sort of like stop motion. It's like I said earlier, it's like a paper puppet where, like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen any of the very old early paper puppet movies, where what they did was they would draw the individual pieces of the character on little pieces of paper, cut them out, and then pin them together with pins, and then they would shoot it like stop motion, where they take a picture, move the parts around, take another picture, move the pieces, but they all move around in, like, rotating around those pins or using those pins. Oh shit, my tablet. And that's very much how Toon Boom works. So, for example, this right here is the pin that it's supposed to move around. So I get to rotate that, but if I wanted to rotate, say, his hand, I can rotate that around its own pin, but then that also rotates around the arm pin. So it's hierarchy based. So this one will rotate everything underneath it, but then this one only rotates the hand. And Toon Boom stores the information about, like, how they're pieced together. So in Flash, for anyone who's worked in Flash, there's a similar system, but how it works is basically, like, things will move, like this entire arm will move, but then the hand will also be moving on its own. So if I were to move this over here, the hand would go with it, but it's not going to follow the motion of this pin. But in Toon Boom, one thing that's really nice about it is that you can start here and then have another frame over here where it's moving like that. And what it does is it actually rotates around that pin, so that hand is going to retain that nice arc of motion around the shoulder, rather than everything just moves in a straight line the way it does in Flash. So, yeah, but that also can cause problems because if you, for example, are doing a pose where, say, his arm is over here, and it's called Z depth, where you're changing the layering of the pieces around. So you're basically telling this, hey, I want you to be in front of everything else. Come forward for me. If you do this and turn it all the way around twice, Toon Boom remembers that. So he's just going to start pinwheeling his arms. And Flash doesn't do that. So there can be times where if you're animating or you're posing things as you go along, you can forget that you've rotated a character's arm in a direction, and then once you go into animate, you realize that the arm is flailing around a couple times before it actually reaches its end destination, and then you go, oh, I didn't want that. All right, and then you have to go in and unpinwheel it, which is always fun. It's F6. Okay. So yeah. Finger control, there will be we mostly just use the preset hand library. There have been characters in the past, or I've worked with characters in the past who had individual fingers built in. For the most part, there's no real point. The most we will get is usually we'll have part of the hand that is like on top that lets us put an object in their hand, and then we bring this on top of it so that it looks like they're actually holding it. But for the most part, we don't actually have... Yeah, so, sec. A lot of the time, we'll have at least the thumb built in. But yeah, so you can see there we've got these parts of the hand built in so that we can bring them on top of whatever object a character needs to hold. So yeah. So we just pose them out like that, and, you know, using the controls. Oh, one thing that's really nice is we have something they call a pose copier. Where is it? No. Crap, I got rid of my pose copier file. Dang it. Nope, never mind. Anyway, there's a pose copier that we're given, and it... You know what? Here, one sec. I'm just gonna... Will me stopping my, me not streaming anymore ruin the recording? No? Okay. One sec. I'm gonna stop streaming so that I can... Okay. I'm just gonna stop for a second so that I can grab a file without having to, like, open up my documents and everything live. Alright. Just one sec. Yeah. And some can get really, really complicated. Like Bolo. I was very excited to work on Bolo, and then I opened him up and was like, oh god. I mean, I'm still excited, but Jesus. No, he was just the roughest because it was mainly that I opened him up and was like, oh no, because this is the first season where he's actually being animated. So he's one of the newest rigs, and the newest rigs tend to be the most jank because they haven't had their bugs figured out and like their issues worked out. Because as you work with a character, sorry, one sec. There we go. Okay, I can bring this back up again. Yeah. So he's never actually had to be animated. So there we go.
How often do you have to draw new parts for
New parts?
Yeah.
Not like maybe once or twice a scene if that. Like, there will be scenes where you can get away without doing any of them, and there will be scenes where there's so many. So it really varies depending on the scene. Sorry, my tablet has a wonky port on it, so... Oh, yeah, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free. But yeah, Bolo, he was just, I opened him up and started animating or posing with him, and I was just like, oh no, because characters, as the season progresses, will get more and more refined as they have, like, we'll run into cases where it's like, oh, okay, when I need to do this, like, this isn't working, and we give feedback to the team that builds the puppets, and they'll fix things and then send out an updated version of the rig. But he was so new that I opened him up, and it was like, oh god, this is terrible. We don't even have, like, we didn't have a profile view for him for the longest time. So there would be scenes where I needed a profile view and I just didn't have one. So I had to, like, figure out how to, like, jerry rig one myself from a 3/4 view. So it was things like that where it was just they hadn't been built yet. So he was the and it's just a case where it was just such an early rig, or a baby rig basically. I would say the most complicated character I've worked with. I would say that of the main cast, Gary's is actually, weirdly enough, one of the more complicated ones in my experience, just because his jacket and how it has to be layered with his like with his shirt underneath, and how if it flares out, how it needs to show the inside of the jacket. That one is weirdly complicated, but thankfully doesn't need to really get messed with very often. But yeah, other than that, probably Quinn, because yeah, she has a similar thing going on with her outfit where they just, like, they have inside parts to their outfit that the other characters don't really have. So yeah, that pretty much makes them the most complicated ones, at least that I've worked with. I haven't had a chance to work with the full cast yet, so I can't even say. Like, I haven't worked with Tribor yet. Who else have I not worked with? Kevin sucks. I can say that. But just because geometric characters are never fun, so Kevin manages to suck just as bad as his actual character in the show. Like, you hate him because he's a round object, and if you don't pose him perfectly, it's really obvious. Like, he doesn't have that sort of organic mushiness that you can kind of get away with things not being totally right. So with him, it's always just like you animate something and it's like, that doesn't look right. The perspective's wrong. God damn it! And it's just tears. At least for me, I have a really hard time with Kevin. But there are other animators on the show who do an amazing job with him. And every time I see their work, I'm just like, how do you do this? I don't get it. Like, teach me, God. Because yeah, Kevin. But yeah, I would Gary is my favorite to animate out of all of them. Anyways, okay, so no questions. So I'm just gonna open up the file where I've actually got him all posed out. Okay, so this is the version that I've got where he's actually all posed out. So this is the next step that I would end up with. Yeah. So, I was gonna say, and I don't remember if I finished saying it, but these are scenes that we were given when we were first starting up on season 3, just after getting hired, as kind of an easing us in, getting us used to working with the characters. We would turn them in and get some feedback on them to have the leads be like, okay, this is what you're doing right, this is what you're doing wrong, like, this doesn't look right, focus on this. And actually, I haven't really looked at this since then, and I can see a bunch of things that are off. Like, this is up too high and should be further over, like that. But yeah, so that's kind of what we end up with when we start to animate. Here, I'll play it through. So I'm gonna just go in and kind of spruce these up a little bit. That's not right. I was still learning this rig. His hand's too small. But yeah, so there will be like little things that you kind of get used to with characters the more you work with them. And actually, I'm not super happy with how his head looks there. Oh god, the background's turned on. Yeah, it's a bit of both. Like the boards are usually a pretty decent rough gauge of the timing for a scene, but it can be off in where in the action the transition actually happens. So, for example, something will change poses in the boards, but in animation they should really be hitting that pose, like that is when they start changing into the pose, like that sort of thing. So you really have to use your own judgment for when a character hits a pose. And this should be more forward. Yeah, so we'll get to this point. Actually, I'm gonna do that. There we go. And then, nope, don't like that either. There we go. And then we can go into animation, which is kind of like the computer does do a lot of the work, but it's also kind of dumb. So a lot of the time what you're mostly doing for animation is going, like, letting the computer do it and then going in to clean up all of its dumbness. So I'm going to make sure that's going to be on twos. So I want there to be a frame every other frame, or a keyframe every other frame, because that's traditionally what animation, because this is a 24 frame per second scene, and uh, traditional animation is typically on like one frame every 12 seconds, or sorry, it's on ones if you're doing 12 frames per second. So if we're working with a 24 frame per second scene, it's going to be a frame every other frame where it's being held for 2 frames. So it gets referred to as being on twos. And there are different variations. You can have things on threes, you can have it on fours, and then you start getting into more and more like jerky action. Like Spider-Man Spider-Verse, it had scenes where there were things done on threes, and that's part of why it had that almost stuttery look to it that was really cool. And when that came out, when the trailer dropped, everyone in the animation world basically lost their fucking minds. It was amazing because holy shit, this, like, they're doing this. Still, I'm so like in love with that movie. But yeah, so there will be like animation on ones. Most 3D animation is on ones because otherwise it ends up looking like Spider-Verse, where you're not used to it, and also because the camera in 3D works a lot like the camera in like live action. So having things on ones is how live action is filmed. It is one frame, or it's 24 frames every second. So it'll be on ones. 2D animation is typically on twos, unless there's some variations with, if things are moving really fast, you'll have things on ones. If you have a large camera move where the background is panning, it has to be on ones, otherwise it looks like the background is almost strobing. It creates a weird stutter effect that doesn't, like, the human eye does not like it, so it has to be on like ones. So if the background is moving on ones, the character has to be moving on ones for the most part, unless it's a very, very slow motion, in which case you can get away with it. And then, like, there's odd variations, like, outside of that, where you get threes and fours, but for the most part, it's either going to be on ones or twos. And the average animation for something like Final Space is going to be on twos, because that just looks the best. If you put things on ones, that's like tweening. Like tweening is on ones. It tends to look really weird and robotic. So 2's kind of cheats it, and it makes it look more like traditional animation of the past, which is what people are used to, and it feels better overall, basically. So, going into this, I'm gonna have him come in, and then with Toon Boom, what you're doing is right now it's just going directly from one point to another at a like constant rate. Every frame is the same distance from every other frame, basically. So you guys have probably seen the whole. One sec. Nope, that's not right. What? Oh God, I changed the. I went and changed my shortcut. Now I don't remember what the shortcut for this is. Is it R? That's what it is. Okay. I am a mess. So you guys have seen the whole like this thing where you've got, and these represent frames. Currently, that's basically what the frames are doing, where they're all evenly spaced all the way across. But we don't like that because it makes everything look super robotic. So what I'm going to do is go in and tell it that I want it to change up that timing. So I want him to come in and ease into the animation. So I want him to have... So I want it to do something like this, where the frames are getting closer together, where so it's like he's slowing to a stop, basically. So I'm telling the computer that I want it to do that, and I don't know, maybe 30 coming in. So this is kind of like percentages. What is going on? Did I press something weird? Yes, I did. I hid Gary. So he's kind of slowing as he comes in, rather than maintaining his speed until he stops abruptly. And then oh wait, actually, never mind. He should be doing that for this one. So yeah, and with timing, once you've got the posing done, you can kind of throw the timing of the storyboard out the window, and you just need to, like, within reason, if there are certain things happening, especially if they have audio cues, you need to match those. But for the most part, you can kind of play around with the timing a little bit. So especially because the storyboard artists will sometimes board things in a way that there is no physical way for a character to go from point A to point B in the amount of time that they have allotted. Like, unless they are a jet plane for a few of those frames and they just zoom across the screen. So you can kind of play a little loose with the timing in certain situations. There are going to be some cases where, like, the timing is hard fast. You can't mess with it at all. But for something like this, I'm just going to push some of these a little later, and try and make up some time later in the scene, like make things a little bit faster so that they hit those beats, because otherwise there's no way that I can get him to come to a reasonable stop the way a human being would without doing that. So I'm actually going to do 30, no, 20 and 30. So there, so it's like he's walking into the room. And I'm going to turn that off and deal with that later. So what you start off with is everything is moving at the exact same rate, until you kind of get things reasonably looking alright timing wise. I don't worry about secondary or anything like that until I've got the main motion figured out. So that looks pretty alright. So I'm going to put this on 2s and then start working on, or actually, one sec, some of his parts are freaking out. So that's not right. I don't know why that's doing that. I don't know why his hand is, I don't like that that's doing that. That is a problem with the drawings. So, oh yeah, you can see that his thumb is separate, like it's above the rest, so that if he needs to have something in his hand, his thumb can be above. But what's happening here is that, nope, that's not right. Whoops. Is that, yeah, that hand and this hand are at 2 different angles, and that is messing with how it ends up looking in the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change this so that it matches the direction of this. There we go. So you mainly want, or you mostly want all of the drawings of a certain body part to be facing the same direction or like on the same axis so that when you are tweening things or using pegs, you don't end up with problems like that. So then I can do that. And now, when it pops between them, they're in mostly the same position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have him pop between those different drawings, autosave, partway through. That's a pretty big jump, so probably bring them there. Yeah. So now he's moving between drawings, like different hands. When there is a large enough jump between 2 frames to kind of mask that. Oh, goodbye. Thanks for joining. Glad you had a good time. So now he's going to be on 2s. Nope, gotta move that up 1. So now, so you can see that, oh, actually, one sec, I'm going to pull it back 1 more. And make it jump. There we go. There. So that's a large enough movement that it'll kind of disguise that he's jumping between 2 different frames, or different hands, different drawings on different frames. It's easier to play without the audio. Yeah, so you get like a frame where his hand is one drawing, and then the next it's a different one. And if you do that when the frames are far enough apart, it kind of tricks the eye and makes it think that it's moving smoothly between them. But this guy should not be behind. Nope. What's going on there? Oh. There we go. And it's a lot of that. It's going through and seeing like, oh, the computer told it, it was dumb, it told it to be in front there, it shouldn't be like that, so I'm going to just push it back. Yeah, so that looks pretty alright. So next what I get to do is, what I like to go and do is, I go into, what was it, O? No. Just O? Crap. Shift O? No. Dang it. Sorry, I can't remember the, center. Okay, Shift O. No? Not gonna work? Boom. Control-Shift-L. Okay. There we go. So I go in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag his arm motion, down one frame so that it's a frame behind everything. And I'm going to start it there, get rid of those frames, and then I'm going to animate that separately. I'm still going to have it ease in to 80 because that's what everything else was on. But it just puts it a frame behind everything and gives it a little bit of dimension, so that, because if you have everything moving at the exact same time, it looks very robotic, and like parts of people don't move at the exact same rate at the exact same time. So having things slightly off ends up making characters look more alive. So you have that, where his arm comes to a stop slightly after the rest of him, and I also like to do that with the head. And sometimes the neck. I'll probably do the neck tonight. So I'll just pull it over one. And actually with this one, I'm going to get rid of all of the frames. Ah, crap. There we go. And I'm just going to reanimate this one and have it go 50 on one side and 80 on the other is kind of my go-to when it comes to ease in, ease out. It's kind of like, for me, that sweet middle ground where it's nice and almost like it's not quite a snappy action, but it's not a smooth and slow motion. It's that nice in between where it kind of makes characters look alive, at least in my opinion. But I'll play with it a little bit, and I usually go with that as a base and then build on top of that. So yeah, so that brings his head slightly behind, because for the most part, at least in my experience, characters' torso, like the middle of their body, tends to reach their final destination before the rest of their parts, like their arms, their head, their neck. So I'll usually offset the arms slightly behind the torso and the head, and if the motion is extreme enough, I'll have the head lagging even further behind the arms. But it depends on the motion. Sometimes I'll have them lead, but for the most part, my default generic action like animation is torso reaches its stop first, and then arms and head. So that, and if anything, I'm gonna actually drag that slightly over to make it even further delayed. So that kind of makes his face action a little more like snappy, poppy, peppy. I don't know what you'd call it. So you end up with this. And then if something is a little like it's going too far between it, I'll just go in and delete that, make sure that there's no ease on any of it. Like I just put these back to 0 because otherwise it messes with the timing. And then tween between those to smooth out that action. So now it's not going quite so far, and his eyebrow drawing is popping. Oh, crap, what was it? There we go. Yeah, so it's just about like messing with timing and taking the very robotic looking basics that the computer gives you and adjusting them until it looks more traditionally done, until it looks like there's more of a human element in it. So then we end up at this point. So actually, I'm going to have that. I'm going to have him slow down even more at the end. So what I'll do is go in, add some extra frames, pull those back. Because his motion at the end of the scene is super fast, so I've got a lot of time that I can play around with. So it means that I can kind of mess around with things, and then if I don't end up having time, I can pull some things back, like move some frames more closely together to speed up certain motion where the motion being fast makes sense. So I actually would like him to kind of have a bit of something between there, maybe. So I'll widen that space again, and add another frame in there. Yeah, and then you kind of, and once you're happy with like this couple of poses, excuse me, sorry, and then you move on to the next. So I'm happy with that. So I would move on to the next pose and do the same thing where I'm letting the computer figure out this first part and then building on top of that. Another thing that I do like to do, because one thing that this show that Final Space really has is the characters have a sort of like squishiness to them. That's really fun. So what I like to do is once I'm pretty much happy with how a motion is looking, I will go to, there we go. I'll go to into his rig and I'll add another peg on top, or actually underneath. And I make that the squish peg. And it just kind of lets me add a little bit of like goopiness to them without having to worry about adding it in like mid while I'm figuring out the rest of the motion. So I'll take the squish peg and go to it. And I figure out how do I want Gary's head to squish? So I think I want it to get kind of mushed down as he's coming up, and then ease back out of that squish by around this point. So I'll do this, and I'll go in, and I'll just kind of squish his head down a little bit.
Does this
Not
process change a lot when you're animating characters that are interacting, like fighting or hugging or anything? Is the
When it
process much
comes to,
different?
not, it is and it isn't. Characters interacting is a much larger pain in the butt, but it's also fun too, in a weird way. If they're fighting, especially like fight scenes and action scenes are a lot of fun because they're the kind of scenes where you have a lot of leeway to get away with things. Characters, like if they're popping between poses, doesn't matter because they're moving so fast that like you're basically implying an action more than actually showing it. So that's when the squish gets a lot higher. But you follow similar steps with it. It's hard to describe. It's very, every scene is unique. Every scene has to be handled its own way. But I would, for the most part, follow these steps with characters interacting. It would just be, there would be more like once I let the computer figure its stuff out. There's a lot more tweaking involved. So there will be things like if character's hand has to be on a character's shoulder, there will be a lot more going in and making sure that that hand is staying in the spot where it's supposed to be, because the hand will stray away as the computer is making it move from one pose to another. So
Yeah.
there's just a lot of tweaking afterwards involved.
Do you animate two characters at the same time when you do that kind of thing? Or is it like one at a
Um,
time?
Usually one at a time.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll typically choose which one is the one that's creating a motion and which is the one that's following it. So, for example, like again with the hand on a shoulder example, I would be animating the character who's got the hand on their shoulder first because I want their movement so that I can then animate the character who has their hand on their shoulder and have the hand be following the movement of that character's shoulder. Because if I do it the other way around and I animate the character who has their hand out, then I'm then going to have to go back in after I've animated the character that they're like holding on to and adjust that animation to follow.
Yeah.
So it's just easier if you do the one that's leading first. But yeah, so you add the squishiness in, and actually, I think adding a bit of rebound would be nice. So I've just got these pre-built custom scripts that are really nice that I discovered like earlier this year that let me put a certain ease on. So this is 50 in, 80 out, 60 in, 90 out, 40 in, 70 out, 30 in, 30. I use this one for camera moves a lot because you need to have a slight ease on camera moves, but you don't typically want it to be quite as extreme as character animation. And then I'll have a 50 in for certain things like if I'm trying to have a middle peg that's doing something and it's an ease in on one side and an ease out on the other, I've got my 50 in and 80 out, 80 out, 80 out separate. But these things are super awesome, and they're not built into Toon Boom, but I wish they were. But Toon Boom hates its users, and they never make things easy on us. So there are features that would have been super handy to use that they're never going to put in. And then there's other features that nobody in the industry needs that they just keep adding. And I'm mostly joking, but I would love the ability to create custom ease, like presets. Because there are some that you just use constantly. And like if it weren't for these, you would just be going in, opening up the text box, putting them in by hand every time. But oh well. But anyway, so squish on the head. So it's very slight, and honestly, a lot of the time it's not even noticeable, but it does add something. Actually, I want to make sure that this one is okay. That is actually squishing out. So once I'm happy with that, I can go in and set this on twos using this, which is also super handy. And there we go. Adds just a slight amount of kind of like squishiness to his head. It's really only noticeable if you look at it with and without. It's one of those things where you don't notice it, but it makes a difference. And I'll also typically add one on the head, like I'll add one to the face. If there are like parts of the characters that I need to have a little bit of like elasticity to them, I'll add a squish peg onto. But I like to do that afterwards so that I'm not having to deal with it while I'm figuring out the motion itself. I can add it on as a bit of a tweak in the end. And so I'll do it with the face as well. Oops. And with this one, with the face, I'll also sometimes add in a bit of drag, which makes the head like feel like it's moving more in 3D space. So in this one, I'll also kind of squish his face a little bit. And then I want a bit of drag on it as well. So I'll start with squishing his face. And then with this one, I want to have his face kind of up a little bit more so that it feels like it's being dragged, like behind the rest of his face, or the rest of his head, sorry. And then put my 50/80 on. See how that looks. Yeah, so that's giving him a nice, like, settle on his head. So then when you watch back, yeah, not bad. It's easing out a little hard. So I'll go in and just kind of smooth that out a little bit. And with how much his face is moving, I'd probably do the same with his hair, or at least his bangs. I swear I can spell. Oh, and the first thing I always do is make sure that the peg is in an appropriate place when I've put a new one in. Because Toon Boom likes to put it in the middle of the scene, or the middle of the screen. So a lot of the time you'll have to rearrange them. My poor tablet. Holy crap. Okay, I think it's charged enough. It's got a wonky port where if I move it slightly, it disconnects and then reconnects over and over again in succession. Okay, so up. I don't think I really need a squish on his hair. I just need to make it look like his face isn't moving on its own. So I'm just gonna do this. In this case, actually, I'm gonna have it be sort of squishing up because that's what the hair would be doing if it was getting dragged behind the head rotating. Oh, actually, needs a little more. There. So that just kind of makes it look like the face isn't moving all on its own. And I would do the same for, the rest of his hair, different parts of him, the ears. I would make the ears follow the motion of his face, just so that it looks like his head is actually rotating in 3D space rather than just being flat parts that are moving around. So, for the ears, I normally won't put like a squish on them. I'll just kind of do that. Yeah, so it's just a lot of tweaking afterwards, and eventually everything's kind of moving in sync and as is one pseudo 3D object, basically. So you can see that the ear is moving with the rest of the rotation of his head, or the implied rotation. So I do have a pre-animated scene. And this is the one that's from episode 12, I believe it was. But eventually you get all of your animation done, you're happy with it, and then it's time to lip sync, which is another thing that's built into the scene, or built into the rig, sorry. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions? And also, is all of this making sense? Am I completely confusing you guys?
It's making sense. It's fascinating to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, at the beginning of the episode launch, we'll be given a group of scenes that, and then we have certain due dates that we have to hit. So, on the episode that I'm on right now, I have 24 scenes that I'm assigned, and they try to give us sequences where it's all shots that are following one another so that we get to do the hookups. So, like, if a character is in one pose at the end of one scene, they're in the same pose but at a different angle in the next scene. And having the same artist doing the same sequence of shots, it makes that easier because you are actually aware of what poses you did or like what poses the characters are in at the end of your shot. So, yeah, this is what is this? Yeah, episode 12. This is sequence 13, shot 1. And this is when they're like it's Gary is fighting his mom as the planet's breaking apart, and she's trying to convince him that Bolo is evil. So, here, let me just close this up. So in this one, Toon Boom really likes this to run slow and chunky. So a lot of the time I'll turn off everything in the scene, especially backgrounds, because backgrounds are huge and they slow things down. But this is the scene. It would help if I had music on. Yeah, so you get to that point, and once you're happy with the animation, you finally get to do the lip sync, and you usually want to save the lip sync, or you almost always want to save the lip sync until the very last thing that you do right before you submit it, because if you have to go back in and reanimate anything, it can mess up your lip sync, because it's just another drawing in the scene. So, and actually, until this version of Harmony, like, thankfully, they introduced something that's really nice in Harmony, which is that if you lock drawings, you no longer affect them in the timeline. But if I remember correctly, up to this version, if you had to change any, if you did anything, if you deleted keyframes, it didn't matter if something was locked or not, it affected everything. So trying to animate around a finished lip sync was the biggest pain in the butt, and you didn't want to do it, so you would always leave it to last. Thankfully, it's a lot easier now to redo some animation if need be or make revisions once the lip sync is already done. But until now, it was awful. So for lip sync, you want to turn on scrubbing. So it means that you can, as you drag around in the timeline, you hear the audio at the same rate that you are dragging the play thing, playtime, whatever. And as a general rule of thumb, sorry, just catching up on the chat. As a general rule of thumb, what you want to do is be hitting your lip sync about 4 frames before the sound. So, for example, around here is the M, the I am M sound. So he's hitting the M on like about 4 frames, or sorry, he's hitting the M sound at about this frame. So what I would do is I go back about 4 frames and I hit it at that point because your what is it? There's a delay between the way that your brain processes audio and visuals, and if you lip sync on the frame that a character says something, it actually looks as though the lip sync is delayed, that they're talking after the sound reaches you, because you process visuals more slowly than you process sound, I believe it is. So by moving it back 4 frames, it actually creates the optical illusion that the character is speaking on the frames that the audio is coming out. Because by the time your eye processes that it's seeing something, you then hear what that sound is. And I think it's also to do with the way that you hear things in real life being slightly delayed to the way that you see them. I can't remember what it is exactly. But anyways, the general rule of thumb is 4 frames before. And it also gives you a little bit of wiggle room for, like, sometimes there's going to be some lip sync that, like, it just is happening so fast that you can't hit all of the beats. And in those cases, you just kind of have to fake it, pretty much. Yeah, lip sync. A lot of people hate lip syncing. I've never really had a problem with it, but I understand why people have problems with it. But the 4 frames early rule tends to be pretty good. So that's where he starts opening his mouth, is ah. So I would have it here. So that's the v. So I would put the V mouth here. So yeah, so we've got a whole bunch of different mouths included in the rig, and we have happy mouths, neutral mouths, and sad mouths for all the different ranges of emotion. So in this one, he's not terribly happy, so I'm going to be using some neutral and some upset mouths. So we've got the V mouth. But you also want to favor or like ease between different mouths, because otherwise it ends up being too poppy and cartoony. So for example, for this, I would have his mouth be starting to open a little bit and starting to close right before it actually closes. So you end up with and with this one, I actually want, because he's doing very, with our mouths, ours are always kind of weird. What I typically do for them is I will just have the character close their mouth compared to the vowel noises. So in this one, I'm actually going to swap these mouths. So there, very. So, and you can't see it, but yeah, so we got the very, actually, I would bring this even more, and also bring his tongue up. Yeah, there's like like the mouth has a whole bunch of different parts to it. So we got top teeth, bottom teeth, tongue, mouth. Um, General rule is you don't show bottom teeth in Final Space unless the character has their mouth, like their teeth showing on a T or an S noise, like a T or S. Those are the only times that you see their bottom teeth as part of the style guide. One unfortunate thing about Toon Boom is that watching the playback kind of sucks. So for the most part, what I do is I will, if I need to check something, I just export a version of it. So at like half the scene resolution. Let it export, and then I can watch it back and actually see it as it will be looking by the end, or see it at its full frame rate without it stuttering or lagging or any of those things. And that's also part of why I keep the background off when I'm working, is because it slows down Toon Boom's thought process basically enough that it can be hard to watch things back and have them look the way that they're going to. Scene and watch it through a bunch of times as an MOV to make sure that you didn't miss anything, because the in this case because the background's pretty hefty and it's got some effects going on and things like that. It's a little bit slower. No, it depends. A lot of the time, if there are effects and things like that, they'll get handled afterwards because effects comes later in the pipeline than animation. So we finish our job, our scenes get passed off to effects, and then effects goes in and does whatever they need to. Things like these rocks in the background would probably be handled by animation. It depends on the scene and how complicated something is. If there's something that animation can take care of, we try to. Like, for example, these rocks are easy enough, they're just floating. Animation can just tween them from one position to another. But if, say, the rocks had to rotate in space and, like, look different across the entire scene, we wouldn't have the time or the tools to do that, and that would be left up to effects. Yeah, that was it. I can't remember what it is to recenter this, but anyways, so ends up looking like that. Yeah, and you can check it and make sure that your lip sync is working and all that. And if something's not, you go back in, you fix it up, and so on and so forth. Yeah, go for it with the questions.
Hi. My first question would be if you've ever done a shot that was very easy to make, like so easy that you pretty much uh, made it in a very short of time, more than you would usually take it
Yeah.
to animate it.
Oh yeah. There are tons of shots that in an episode where it'll be like a character is like it's their hand on a display and they're just pointing, like that sort of thing. Those are usually ones that you'll get done in about 10 minutes and upload. So,
Oh,
it a lot of the times it'll like you can even just go straight to animation, skip posing step, and just submit it and then not worry about it. So yeah, it does happen. And usually our quota and the scenes that we are assigned take that into account, where it might be that you have like a handful of scenes that are extra difficult, but then your other scenes are a character not moving like from the shoulders up, and all that's happening is they need a lip sync. So they'll take that into account usually.
right. And the second question is, this is more of a general production question, but is it true that in an in a group of animators you work with the most difficult shots first and then with the easiest one, or how does that work?
It depends on the person. That does usually tend to be how people will do it. That they'll try to get their harder shots out of the way first, because if they do start running out of time, it's easier for leads to reassign shots. Because what happens if you can't get something done before your deadline, you can tell your lead and they can have other people who are done early help out by taking scenes off of your hands. So what you want to do is try and get your harder scenes done and out of the way early so that if you're getting close to that deadline and you realize I can't get all of my work done, then the scenes that need to be reassigned to other animators aren't these horrible, like extremely difficult ones that are going to be put in someone's lap like a day before the deadline. So it's partly so that you can tell before the deadline what your time is looking like and if you're going to be able to get your stuff done. Part of it is so that like once you get all of your hard stuff out of the way, you have a bunch of easier stuff that you can kind of zoom through in the last few days. And know that you're going to have enough time. And also it's so that if things do have to be passed off to other animators, you're not landing them with a whole bunch of extra really tough work that is going to suck to try and get done before that deadline. So generally, yes, people do try to get the hard ones out of the way. And also, additionally, it's so that like the harder ones tend to be the ones that may see more revisions. So getting those out of the way and in earlier gives more time for revisions to be done so that if your lead comes back and is like, okay, you need to fix this, this, and this, you have time to fix them. Versus if you submit a really difficult shot right before the deadline, then you're going to be eating into your amount of time that you have for the next episode, which is going to set you back a little bit. You don't want that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Or is there anything else anyone would like to see?
Is there anything about the paper puppet style of animation that you find restrictive with the limited poses and everything?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of like, there will be some poses where the entire time I'm just like, oh, I wish I could just draw this because this sucks and I hate having to layer it like this and things like that. Especially extreme poses. Like I had a shot on a recent episode where it was an extreme bird's eye where I was basically looking down at the characters. It was at Lil Kato specifically. And I was basically looking down at the top of his head, and I have these rigs that are in no way built for that. Like, they don't have any views that I would need to use for that. So in that case, I did actually I chucked the rig entirely and just drew it by hand. Because that was a case where it would have been 10 times longer and 10 times more difficult to try and fight the paper puppet rig into that pose than it was to just draw it from scratch and like have it be. And it was also the character wasn't moving the entire scene. It was just a shot straight down of him reacting to, I can't remember, like it was like a light show or something like that. Or like it was an effect that's happening before, like in front of him, that's lighting up the area and making it glow. So he wasn't moving at all. So that was, it helped and let me do that. But yeah, that was a case where the puppet was so restrictive that there was no point in even using it. So I just started, or I made it from scratch, basically.
Interesting.
So,
Thanks.
yeah. So especially with the more extreme poses, it can be more restrictive, but at the same time, it's usually more restrictive in the posing pass. But then once you get to animation, you're like, oh, I'm glad I have this because now I don't have to really animate between these poses myself, or it's a lot easier with the help of the puppet. So it's a bit of give and take. But yeah. Anything else? But yeah, was there anything else you guys wanted to see specifically?
Do you have any? Do you have any shot you like the most? If you have there, you haven't shown yet. Like the one
Unfortunately,
yeah.
because all of the scenes that I've worked on for work are for season 3. I can't show any of them off. But like mostly the action scenes that I've been given have been the ones that I enjoy the most because I really just like action scenes and I like how much freedom they give you where you don't have to be so precise. I find slow, like methodical movement to be the most like difficult for me because there any problems with the animation or anything off stands out so much more clearly than in quick, snappy, fast action animation. So, yeah, I have a lot of fun with that. And what else? But then again, on the other hand, I also like the emotional scenes just because I really like pushing emotions, especially sad
Are the tears
animations.
hand drawn, or are they?
Hmm?
Are the
Oh,
tears hand
tears?
drawn, or are they
Yes.
assets?
Yeah, they're handled by effects. So I actually saw a scene from the episode that I'm currently on where a character is crying, and at one point they wipe their tears away, but there aren't any tears in the scene yet because effects hasn't started on it yet, so they're just like ghost miming it. It was pretty funny. But yeah, those are all handled by effects because they're usually custom. Does anyone want to see any of the rigs from the other characters? Because I do have those.
Yes. Is there any like character that has a particularly interesting rig? Like I would
Um,
imagine Bolo. Bolo's rig would be
Bolos isn't
interesting with all the
actually.
arms.
Yeah, it like his character design is interesting. I wouldn't say that his rig is actually terribly interesting because it's pretty standard, especially because it's one of the newer rigs. I'm trying to think who might have. Ash's rig is pretty interesting. Like she's one of the more complicated ones, and because of her hair, we actually have an entirely separate like hair rig that we work with basically where it's pre-animated for whenever she's doing her like floaty powers thing. One sec. Crap. One second. I'm just gonna shut off my screen one more second so I can grab the file that has a bunch of characters in it. So I'll be right back. Mm-hmm.
And
The
is it Mooncake?
easiest. Yeah, actually, it's Mooncake for sure. Cause he's just a blob. He's just a face, pretty much, with little nub legs. Yeah, yeah, he's super easy. But at the same time, he's kind of hard too because he's so squishy that you can make him look weird really easily. But okay, here. Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. He doesn't really do much talking. And what talking he does do is limited to the same handful of syllables, so there aren't very many weird mouth shapes. Yeah, pretty much. Beyond Mooncake, though, I would say that the easiest one to animate is probably. I don't know, actually. Like, anyways, here's the whole gang.
They all look frightened.
Hmm. Ah.
Josh, don't say that.
Oh god,
They
it's
could come
freaking
and
out.
help you. Well, it's all the gang except, the imposter.
Yeah, gang's all here. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't even remember where this is.
Isn't that from the episode
Episode
where
6.
Gary has the talk with Little Cutout? From episode 5, I think?
According to this, it's episode 6.
Oh,
So,
like 6.
I do not know. But yeah, so here's the gang. I got rid of Quinn because I think that's like a a side episode outfit or something like that, so she doesn't count because that's not her proper rig. Or Nightfall, sorry. Keep accidentally calling her or her Quinn. So, which one do you guys want to see? Like that I can dig into. Yeah.
Did you put? Do you have any shots of episode 13 by any chance? Or
No,
what's?
unfortunately, I only have these three
It's
because these were ones that were given out as the tests for us to get started with, and I don't know where I would find any other episode 2 scenes. Or I do, but I would have to go looking for them, and I don't know if I can get access to the original Toon Boom files because of everything being moved to online right now from working from home. But yeah, so like what I was talking about with here, I can show you guys Kevin, and like why he kind of sucks. It's because he's all geometric. And because he's like a circle that's cut in half, basically, it's really easy to like make him look weird, basically. So like, for example, with this, I just changed this. Now this doesn't line up, so you got to move that. And then like the perspective on his arms is gonna be weird, and it's just he's just so many things to worry about, so many angles, and yeah. Anytime you have geometric characters, with animation in general, they're always more difficult than organic ones, just because there's so much less leeway with them. I would say, where it's easier to make them look wrong. Oh, hello. Ryan just walked in. They say hello.
What?
They say hello. He
Hello,
says hi.
nerds.
He says that you're nerds.
No, not in a charming way.
and
Yeah. So yeah, mooncake, super simple, just a face with some nubs and antenna. There's really nothing to him. Different views of him. And that one's got him. That one's a really wonky one, and I'm not sure why it looks like that, but okay. Yep. Different angles of him. And yeah, you just get to move him around. And there you go. Now he's looking up. And that's all I had to do. And like maybe do that. There we go. Mooncake looks up. I mean, I would do a little more. Like I would go in and have his eyes follow the contour of his body. Like that sort of thing. But that's it. That's all I had to do. And now he's looking up and it's so simple. I love Mooncake. Yep. And I don't have Ash's hair cycle in here, but yeah, she's got separate drawings that we can swap out that are actually, no, sorry, this is not it. That make her hair do the cycle where it floats while she's using her powers. So she's interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I can't really think of anything else to talk about. Were there any other questions? It's built in. Or as its own limb? Sort of. Where is it? Whoa, why does he not have his own display? No, that's not right. That's really weird. Little Kato doesn't have his own display port in him. There he is. Let's do this.
Did they ask you about this versus like other shows? Animating on this for CA?
Oh,
I was interested in knowing the difference. Or maybe not, whatever. Near the end.
So, for his tail, just move his arm out of the way. He gets mostly done with the deformers. And for whatever reason, in his rig, oops, his tail deformer thing, that is always turned off for some reason. They just sent it out like that, and I hate it. And it doesn't change anything, except it makes his tail pink, and that annoys me for some reason. So I always have to go in and turn it on, so that his tail doesn't turn pink when I select it. So, yeah, and then just move it around like that. And there's different drawings for it. So I have one where it's just a 2-point. So I can do that. Yeah. Yep, it's pretty easy, and it's nice and built in. Oh, smears. Yeah, that's a good question. No, I haven't talked about it yet. With smears, you can do a lot with the puppet, but a lot of the time what people will do is they will literally just go in and say, for this arm, I need it to smear. I'm gonna create a new drawing. And then I go in, and actually what I would do if it were me, I would go turn off his bracer, turn off his hand, and I would just replace it entirely with its own drawing. Oh, right. I need it to not have a deformer on it. Move all of it to one side. And pretty much just redraw it from scratch. So I would just do like that. As a rough example. And that looks really crappy, but then you clean it up, and then it doesn't look crappy. No. Pretty much. A lot of the time you will just like make the rig match the pose, and it'll just take a while. Or sometimes they will actually include it in the rig for you already, where the person who built it has already done it. And that's always really nice. But yeah, so suddenly smear frame. And one thing that you can do with Toon Boom is you can close gaps with invisible drawings or invisible strokes, like that. And then there you go. Suddenly you have a smear. Yeah. Why are you not filling? What? I don't know why this one's not filling it in. Oh, that's why. For some reason I just have the... There we go. Holy hell, is it windy out tonight. There we go. I had the wrong color selected. Anyways, so yeah, you would just, draw the smear. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Did you ever have to draw a character doing a special pose or something in any occasion? Or
Wait, sorry, doing what?
Doing any special pose for a shot, or someone else does it for you?
Yeah, no, I've had to do it. Like, for example, the one where he was in the worm's eye view, Lil Kato, that would be one that I would probably consider a special pose, and I just had to do it. But yeah, and then you would, like, put it in place. For some reason, I can't get the colors to show up on his forearm, and I'm not sure why today, but whatever. So, you know, pretend that's a good smear frame and not crap. But that's, and then the next frame, you would just turn it back to a normal drawing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and you would do that for any parts of the body that need to have a smear frame. There was another question that was a good one. Oh, the special poses one. Sorry, my brain. What is happening here? I've never seen that. I think this might be an older version of, I don't know, I think this is an older version of Lil Kata's rig, so, they'll just put a bunch of different drawings at the end, so that you have access to them. Or something, I don't know. But yeah, so, just different drawings. With, let's see, pose copier here. Oh, this is what I was talking about earlier, though. With the pose copier, that thing that I was saying, they give you... One thing that's really nice is that we have access to this tool that lets us do this. And it lets us give him all of these pre-built angles to his head. So we don't have to do them ourselves. So, for example, I can do that. Now he's looking down. And, you know, shadow is on the other side. I can have him do that. For some reason his head's backwards. I'm not sure why it's doing that. So, there we go. Yeah. Yeah. There. So, I don't have to, you know, build it into that pose myself. And unfortunately, there are only 3 characters who have this. It's Ash, Gary, and Tribor. But, yeah, hopefully we'll get more further down the line. I mean, Gary also gets kind of the most of in the way of head angles, weird ones. We also have one for poses. Here's what it brought to mind. Oops. Because we do have one for entire poses. And these are just some, like, special poses that have been done in the past. Or not. What? Oh, here they are. Yeah, so we get some, like, pre-built ones. Let me just select all of them. So I can paste them into, like, this pose. And, oh, there we go. Is it gonna do the thing? No? It might not do the thing because it might not be compatible with this rig. Oh, no, there it goes. And sometimes they're kind of broken because it's not playing nice with this rig, but they give us these because they're specialty poses that we might be able to use part of. Like, for example, this might not totally fit what I need, but then I can take part of it, like, say, like, this part. I can use, like, the torso leaning forward and him reaching out, and then just replace the other parts. But it gets me closer than having to do all of it myself. So then I can have him, like, reaching out. And I can combine them like this. And then you can do whatever with the legs. He's just, he's trying to get the TV remote, but he doesn't really want to stand up and get it, so he's just trying to stretch as far as he can. see if he can get the stupid remote, because it fell. Like, it's on the other side of the coffee table now. Or the, like, table with a lamp on it. I don't know. Oh, yeah,
It's
we
very
got the
hard to
pose
know.
copiers. We also have... Actually, I think I made this one myself. One for his torso. So it's just different positions, leaning back and leaning forward. So, like that. And that makes life a lot easier. Yeah. Gary, no! And yeah, if you use them in combination, you can get some good results, and it gets you pretty close to like certain poses without needing to do all of the heavy lifting yourself. Now he's, limboing. Yeah, who needs arms? Arms just make limbo more difficult. So yeah, there's little like tools and tips and tricks and stuff that we use to save time. Things like that. Trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, and this is a weird pose. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, these are the, what I was talking about with the inside of his jacket. So you got, like, there's so many layers. But yeah, this is the part that having to have his jacket flare out sucks. It's like that, and I think it's this. Yeah, it needs to get turned on because this cutters the inside of his shirt, so that it just shows the back of his jacket. So it just makes things more complicated. So like that sort of thing. So, and how do I get this out here? No. There we go. Yeah, and it's also partly because turning on the deformers for it, it just turns into a spaghetti mess, so it can be hard to tell which ones are doing what sometimes. Like this one, okay. Oh, that's the front of the jacket, okay. That one's the back. So like that sort of thing. Getting it to flare out. That's a pain in the butt. But, it doesn't happen very often, thankfully. So, it's not too bad. It's just, that's what I would say makes him one of the more complicated rigs. Just because he has all of that possibility in him that doesn't necessarily get used, but, occasionally does. Yeah. Is there anything else? But yeah, I would say that Hugh, he kind of sucks for the same reason that Kevin does, because he's another geometric object, where if you don't get the angles right, it can be really obvious. And also, his eye things have perspective to them, and that sucks. That's never fun. Because it means that I actually have to think about what I'm doing. Because now he's looking down. But then I have to keep the eye shine in the same direction that it was before. And yeah, like stuff like that. Anytime you've got geometric objects, it just makes things more difficult. Yeah, they pop out slightly. Yeah. And no, Hugh's great. I just mean animating him sucks. Because he's an unfortunately geometric boy. There are quite a few tutorials and like lessons that you can find on YouTube these days. There's one girl that I can link later. I'll just have to find her. She does a series of YouTube videos where she just kind of walks through different things you can do with Toon Boom, like different basics and like animation and stuff like that. But yeah, YouTube is great. Because now that Toon Boom has allowed people to create tutorials on how to use their software, which they didn't used to do, the market for that has kind of exploded. I know. Ryan's off to one side looking horrified at the cat. She still sings. But yes. So YouTube and Toon Boom does also have their own video tutorials on their website that you can find. I can link a bunch of them in the group chat in a bit, like after this. Yeah. I learned how to use Toon Boom in school, partly. That was my introduction to it because I went to school for animation. I went to Seneca College in Toronto and got introduced to it in my second year of animation. But like I said, that entire year, my brain basically turned as smooth as an egg and refused to learn any of it. So a lot of what I learned, or like how I learned Toon Boom, was just hands-on figuring it out. It was just like I'd have assignments and I would do it and it would suck and like my work would be terrible, but by the end of it I knew a few more things than I started with. And rigging my own characters especially taught me a ton about how it worked and like how to get better with it and things like that. But yeah, it was a lot of like a little bit of learning things in class, but it was like 10% that and 90% just working with it. But I will say to take that with a grain of salt because I have always been the kind of person who learns software by doing it. Like that's how I'm learning Blender right now. Is I'm not watching really any tutorials. I'm just sitting down and doing it. I'm just trying to model a shark character and every time I run into something where it's like I need to know how to do this, I Google it. And then I have learned a new thing about how to use Blender. So my way is very not the most streamlined, but it's just how I learn things best. So, yeah, it's gonna be very like how you learn a thing best. But there are a lot of tutorials out there on YouTube that I would recommend looking into. And yeah,
How much of your,
Blender.
animation knowledge was from school versus work experience?
Um, it's hard to say because like my problem was that I had undiagnosed ADHD for most of school, so I got medicated for it in my last year of college and basically started playing catch up to where a lot of other people were because all of my stuff had been lagging behind up to that point, and then suddenly I had the focus to actually do the work and caught up very quickly without it being like actively through those classes that most people had made their progress during. So it's hard for me to judge, but animation is very much a thing where once you know the fundamentals, like it's got a very low like barrier of doing it. Like once you learn the fundamentals, you are animating, but getting good at animation is very much like doing it and learning it and practice like any other art form, where getting good at doing life drawing is just doing it a whole bunch, and with each one that you do you get a little bit better than you did in like the last one. So it's a lot of that, and also getting like you really do learn a lot once you enter the industry because then you're getting feedback from higher ups and your leads and things like that, and they are people who will sit down and actually show you like this is like they'll take your animation and they will go over it and improve it, and you're like, oh, that looks so good, and they've only done a few things, so you get to see like in real time and in life that like here's how they took your average animation and made it really good, and here's what they did, and you can and like ask them and be like, how did you do this thing that you did to make it look really good, and ask them to show you like tips and tricks and stuff like that. which are really helpful. So, like, animation class is great, but it's a lot of they're showing you the fundamentals that it is then your job to take and run with, pretty much. Yeah. I don't know, I'm rambling at this point.
Yeah, it's good to know. I'm doing an animation course at university right now, so
Nice. I would also say that part of it is that you can learn everything that you can learn in like a school through online classes or like online tutorials and things like that. The difference is, do you have the motivation to do that? Because what I found that the biggest thing I got out of animation and art school was having something that I needed a deadline to force me to do it. Otherwise, it was never going to get done. If I was just going to rely on doing something because I felt like it, I was never going to learn those skills. But having like a teacher to assign an assignment and give me a goal that I had to work towards was like the biggest thing that pushed me to improve, was that I just needed that driving force that school gave me, basically. And that's part of why you learn so much as soon as you get out of school as well and into the industry, is that suddenly you have deadlines that your paycheck is based off of, and that's very motivating for getting your work done. So, it, like, more than anything, school was more of a driving factor for me than it was actually supplying the skills. It was supplying the reason to learn the skills, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, were there any other questions? Oh, hand drawing all the way. That's kind of my bread and butter. Bread and butter. I consider myself a traditional animator, and that's what I'll always love the most. But the reason that I jumped off of Looney Tunes, which is what I was doing at the time, which was traditional animation for the most part, and got onto Final Space, was because A, I love Final Space, and B, I was having wrist problems for the last couple of years, and I really just needed to give my wrist a break, and jumping onto a puppeted show like Final Space gave me the chance to rest my wrist that it really needed, and has allowed me to kind of finally see a lot of improvement in my wrist pain. Because basically what happened was, for a while I was working on like a tablet, monitor tablet that wasn't a Wacom. It was one of the cheaper ones that you can get on the market that would normally be fine. It was perfect for drawing, and if I had been doing a job that was like painting, I would have had no problem. But for whatever reason, the thing really didn't like me doing this, where I was selecting something in the timeline and dragging it. If I tried to do that, it would just randomly drop what I had selected partway, unless I pressed down on the screen with basically all of the force in my arm, which overtaxed one of the tendons on the outside of my arm, and ended up with wrist problems because of it. So, yeah, it took me like 3 years to get to a point where I can actually do drawing for fun again on the side, which is unfortunate. Yeah, so now that I'm on Final Space and able to relax my wrist a little because I can kind of switch things up and not have to rely on it so much, it's made significant progress, which is nice. But yeah, I do definitely prefer traditional animation, just because it just feels more fun, to me at least. And speaking of, for traditional animation, there's a program that is super cool that I wish I had a license for, that so that I could show it off today. But it's CAC Annie. It's kind of expensive, but not as expensive as Toon Boom. And it is a program that uses vector-based lines that actually allows you to tween between things. It's hard to describe, but I highly recommend like looking it up. It's like I used to have the trial version on my computer. I don't think I do anymore, otherwise I would show it off. But it is super cool. It's this guy. It's a Japanese program, and I don't think it's gonna let me use it because my trial or my
What was the name
subscription
of it
has
again?
ended. CAC Annie. Like it's this here. I can put it in the chat. It's yeah, Breath of the Wild. Oh. Nope. Yeah, it's not gonna let me use it. Dang it. Oh well. But yeah, it's super cool and like it's hard to even describe. But basically, you draw you do your line art and then it assigns it numbers and then you do the next pose and you assign the same numbers and it will actually in between for you. And it is the coolest thing I've ever seen and it's like it's a halfway point between traditional animation where you're hand drawing every frame and puppet animation and it's amazing and I love it and I want to play around with it more, but it's like $30 for a month's license if you don't buy it outright. And I think a license for a year is like for $300 or something like that, which is actually not terrible compared to Toon Boom, but it's the kind of thing where I wouldn't use it enough to invest the money, but I wish I could because it is so cool. Oh, yeah, programs switching to monthly payments. I hate it so much. I think most people in the anime or the art world in general hate it because it used to be that you could just buy a program outright and you just had it forever. And I miss that. But yeah, it's kind of
If Procreate switches to monthly, I'm gonna cry.
oh, that would suck.
Bought it like
I
2
mean,
years ago. I'm still
yeah.
using it.
Yeah, that's right. Because I have it bought. I bought it outright on my computer, but on my iPad, it is a subscription service, and I hate it. Sucks. But like for certain programs, I do understand it because they are constantly adding features that you wouldn't be able to get without buying the new version anyways. Otherwise, but it would be nice to just be able to buy a version and then just have it at that version forever so that you at least always have that version. I don't know. I would almost wish that like they would bring back something where you can just buy the program as it is at that moment and you don't get any of the upgrades, but you then have it as it is forever while also allowing you to go into the subscription model and then you always get the upgrades whenever they come out. Like I just wish there was a halfway point between there. But I mean I should probably wrap up soon cuz dang, we've been going for over 2 hours at this point. Yeah, and Ryan and I want to go and finish up the last couple episodes of Doro Hedoro because we started watching it the other day and it's so good. Yeah, yeah, like upgrades as DLC. Yeah, I agree. All right, well this was fun, and I mean if you guys have any more questions, I can always answer more, just as text. Like not tonight because Doro Hedoro, but I'd be down for doing just like a question and answer thing, not
I do have
like live streaming.
one more.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry. I've asked this to pretty much everybody who comes up and shows us stuff. But with one word, without spoilers, how would you describe season 3?
Season 3, I would describe it as more emotion. Yeah, just more emotion.
More emotion.
More
Where can
emotion.
you put more emotion?
Was it supposed to be a word or a sentence?
It can be a sentence if you want.
Yeah, just more emotion. That's how I would
Cool.
describe it.
Thank you,
Thanks for
CatShark,
having
even
me.
though I
Very
only...
fun.
Thank you. Even though I only made it for like the last 30 minutes.
Well, thanks for joining for the last 30 minutes. And yeah, this is going to be recorded, so you guys get to see the animation stuff.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So thank you for your time and sharing this amazing content.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I feel like I rambled the entire time, but I'm glad you
No,
guys
it's
enjoyed
okay.
it. All right, well, you guys enjoy the rest of your night. And I'm going to go watch Doro Hedoro.
Hey.
All right, see you guys.